Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to question time. I was asked, you should know immediately who I'm talking about. I was asked this morning if I was going to quote Voltaire, and I said no, and I was lying. Voltaire said, "Measure a person by the quality of their questions, not their answers." I'm hoping we'll get some quality answers, but really it's going to be about the quality of your questions. I'm Graham Stokes. I'm Director of Dementia Care at HC1 and Visiting Professor of Person-Centred Dementia Studies at the University of Bradford. And what I'm going to do is introduce, from my right, my esteemed colleagues. So Karan, can we start with you? Could you introduce yourself?
Karan, Jutlla, Head of the Centre for Applied and Inclusive Health Research at the University of Wolverhampton and Dementia Lead. The Centre for Applied and Inclusive Health Research is relatively new. It just got approval 2 weeks ago and very much promotes and inspires health research that meets the needs of people who are often underrepresented or underserved in communities, with dementia being a core area of our work. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I'm a Wolverhampton Wanderers fan, by the way. So lovely to see that. Any chance I get, I'll mention Wolverhampton Wanderers. Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Edwards, Director of Clinical Services at Dementia UK.
Thank you, and hopefully some of you know me already. I'm Tim Baverstock. I'm Head of Local Systems at the Alzheimer Society.
And Wolves are playing Spurs on Saturday, and I do hope to beat them.
Hi, I'm Jill Manthorpe, and I'm not interested in football very much. I'm from King's College London, and part of the things I've been doing is been associated with the Journal of Dementia Care for ever since it started, so fantastic to be here today. I'm a former dementia carer, and I'm now a trustee of a large not-for-profit provider called the Orders of St John Care Trust.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Oliver, and I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease on New Year's Eve 2010. Since when, I've developed, with the support of Reinhard Goose, who's at this conference today, a role in Kent called a Dementia Envoy. And then, secondly, in 2015, the Alzheimer's Society had the wisdom to appoint me as an Alzheimer's Society ambassador.
And last but hopefully not least, hi, I'm Susan Mitchell. I'm Head of Policy at Alzheimer's Research UK. So we are one of the other research dementia charities in the UK, particularly focusing on research, really interested in brain health, so great to see there have been conversations about brain health and risk reduction, but also research more generally and potentially advent of new treatments.
Thank you, everyone. So we have no prepared questions. So who would like to go first? And just put their hand up, and we've got a hand to our left.
Hello, I'm Kate White, former care partner. I'm very concerned about stigma and how that's impacting our challenges around dementia. And I have a question for the Alzheimer's research person about what I think is a very stigmatizing video that's been recently released. And I'd like you to give an account of how you can represent people with dementia in the way that it is, and perhaps you'll describe it to those who haven't seen it.
Hi, thanks for your question. And I think I would completely agree, and all of us on the panel I'm sure would, that stigma remains a huge issue for a whole host of reasons. I think your question was about the recent brand film that Alzheimer's Research UK launched. It has a style of an animation, and it's about change the ending. And it has had controversy, I will acknowledge. We've had a lot of positive feedback, but we have had some comments and criticisms as well. From our perspective, this was a film that was produced with engagement and consultation with people with lived experience, as well as experts from a kind of creative perspective as well. As a charity, our kind of aim is to change the ending, ultimately to try and find a cure for dementia. We are not there yet, and we don't claim that we would be in the near term, but we see that as, shouldn't we be aiming to remove the harm and heartbreak of dementia? In terms of the film is an animation where essentially it's kind of a Disney-esque film where the prince develops dementia and his wife is there trying to save him. It is stark, And I think for many people, the response was, that is exactly how my experience has been, and we applaud you for the bravery. For other people, they found it very difficult to watch, and there were concerns for people who perhaps recently had a diagnosis or a loved one had had a diagnosis. I think our argument is, we want to see change, but we need to articulate, because of the stigma, because of a lack of awareness around dementia. The people in this room know it well, but there are many people who really don't. And I think part of this is trying to raise that awareness and to articulate that actually we need to support and care for people with dementia, but should we not be aspiring to minimise that harm and heartbreak in the future? And that is the intention behind the film. And that is the spirit with which it went. And obviously, we're sorry if it does upset people, but I hope for many people they will go, actually someone is articulating the difficult, hard experience I had perhaps as a carer, and that's the intention behind it. But thank you for your question.
Can I respond to that, Chair, as someone with dementia? And I have seen the film, and I often is told I look well, and sometimes with great surprise. I've even been told by somebody they thought I was dead, because how could someone possibly still be alive almost 13 years after being diagnosed with dementia? And sometimes when people see these films, that reaffirms and reconfirms that viewpoint in their mind. I have some issues with the film, but I take it in the spirit it is made and what it's designed to do. What I hope it does, I hope it actually shocks the people who need to be shocked, the people who hold the purse strings, the people who can address the issues that those of us either who have a diagnosis or are family carers face every day. If that happens, that film is worth doing, and it's worked. If it solely upsets people, it's a failure.
Thank you for your question. Thank you indeed. And we have a second question here.
Hi, George Rook. For research, sorry, it's for you again. I've just been in a session where we've been talking a lot about co-production in research with people with lived experience, be they carers or people with dementia. And a lot of researchers, I think, or research teams are still learning what PPI should mean. So would it be possible, or at least I know it's possible, would you please include in any requirement list for research proposals to you that the research team includes a detailed analysis of how they will do co-production from the start?
Thanks for your question, and absolutely both Alzheimer's Research UK and I know Alzheimer's Society and others support that and the importance of involvement, engagement and co-production. From the perspective of Alzheimer's Research UK, we do ask all researchers to ensure there has been a public and patient involvement component to the research bid. I think that's an area that could be strengthened, and certainly within our research team we're recruiting someone to support particularly researchers in this field. I think there's a spectrum of engagement, involvement and co-production, and I think slightly different research projects require different things. I'm not sure co-production is always going to work for every research project, but there are many where it should, and it should happen better. So certainly I think we've got more to do, and I would absolutely want to reassure you that we recognise there's more to do as a research funder. I think more generally though, and there's a point just about getting more people involved in research as well, I think we really don't have enough people involved at every level. So there's that broader bit as a whole group of professionals in this room. What you can do to advocate and support research is actually really important. I don't know whether other colleagues want to respond.
As a researcher, I agree with you that what we used to call by shorthand public and patient involvement, and really has to include people using services and family carers, is so important. I cannot think of a study that could not benefit from lay involvement. I've sat on the COVID panels when at the height of the pandemic, and every single one of those studies funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research insisted on involvement, and that was at the height of the pandemic, and you couldn't get more difficult times than that. And I think when we see applications that haven't had this involvement, the lay summary, which tells everybody what taxpayers' money is being spent on, It makes absolutely no sense if an ordinary person has not read it and said, I don't understand that jargon, those initials, and I really don't get what they're going on about. So I can't think of a study which does not benefit from that, and I think the UK is a leader in this internationally, but we've still got some way to go. The missing bit for me is the involvement of practitioners. And I don't necessarily, with due respect to Graham and colleagues, mean doctors or clinicians, but people who work in care homes, people who are link workers and so on. And they often, even if the PPI, the lay involvement is very good, people are telling them what to do, but not involving them in the process. So I would say every study needs it, and you would be surprised at how intelligent sometimes the lay members of panels and everything else is just seeing the wood for the trees and also spotting snake oil sometimes.
Sorry, just to say, I absolutely wasn't suggesting that you shouldn't have involvement in every project, but I think you need different things. If you're looking at a very basic research project, I'm not sure whether co-production would be as effective. I think you need co-production as you get closer to services. So that was a spectrum. People may disagree, and I wouldn't feel to be the expert on this, but absolutely there should be involvement at every stage. Just quite how involved you are, I think, could vary accordingly. Obviously, if you've got an expertise in fruit flies, then that is fine. But I mean, that was where I was coming from with some of the more basic research. But thank you, fair point, Jill.
So Susan and Jill agree just when I wanted some disagreement on the panel. Next question.
Would each panel member please answer the most difficult dementia-related question they've ever been asked?
Who would like to go first?
People at that end of the table.
They're not looking at me.
Yeah, well, I've had quite a few in my clinical career. I suppose the one that hits home, the one that's hardest for me is when you're talking to children about dementia. And in my own family, my mum had Alzheimer's disease, and talking to my kids about whether they would get dementia was probably the hardest thing.
That's an easy question, isn't it? I think, in reality, for me, the hardest question I get asked since I've moved to the Alzheimer's Society is, why can't you do things quicker? And that's not an Alzheimer's Society thing. I mean, dementia in general, the work that we're doing with government, the work that we're doing, as you heard this morning, with local government and with systems. And I think it's a really hard question to answer because there's no right answer. The answer is, it's staring us all in the face what we need to do. Why can't we do it? And so that question frustrates me a lot. So it might not be the hardest question, but it's certainly the most frustrating.
Yeah, I think people who know me know what I'm going to say to this. And in my career, and I've been in this field around dementia care and inclusion and experiences in ethnic minorities for over 15 years now, and I still get asked the question, why when Dad or Mum got the diagnosis is there no support available for us? And I have to answer that question as someone who's considered to be working relatively a lot and considered leading an area of work, and it's always been a really, really difficult question to answer. And that's why I appreciate and promote co-production, because, and I think people have different understandings of what co-production means and involves, and there's that big spectrum that we all need to be a lot clearer on. So for me, co-production is about understanding what is needed by the community members themselves, and how us as academics and clinicians can all come together to start develop that idea and bring it into some form of fruition. So I still get asked that question, and I still find it the most difficult to answer.
To me, just talking about staff, it would be, why should I stay in this job when I should work, if I worked in a supermarket, I could take the kids on holiday? And I can't answer that.
My hardest question I've been asked, I get asked a lot, and in one respect it's easy to answer, in other respects it's almost impossible to answer, depending upon how the dementia is affecting me at the point when I'm asked the question. And the question is, do you really have dementia?
Okay, that's a very powerful question to kind of follow up from. And I think my question is probably, the difficult question I get is why for cancer there is support, treatment, care in a way that there isn't for dementia, and the realities of the kind of disparities, and then the broad support about support and care and what that means and what's available through NHS Care and others.
Maybe Richard hasn't got a question.
Richard, thank you for that. Next question.
I want to go back to a point that Jill made earlier on, following on from a very insightful question from George. Talking about dementia care practitioners, and those are the people that get up out of bed every day and go and do the work that we all talk about. What are you all doing individually in your panel and as your group to both include, advocate, and learn from, alongside learn with, people who do the job, both paid and unpaid?
I'll happily start. I'm going to go back to my previous job as well. I think it's a really important question. I think I learnt the most about dementia and elderly and frail care in general from practitioners, care staff, OTs, people who were the ones who could advocate on behalf of people but also include people in the right conversations. And we need to do more of that. So, and it's not just about co-production. Co-production is really, really important. But we need to understand people that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, whether it be in a care home, whether they have strong views as well as to what good looks like. They talk to people day in, day out, and we need to include them. So in my team, we try and include as many people as possible in that conversation with the decision makers. Are we good enough at it? Probably not. That's why you're asking the question. But I think it's really, really important that we understand that practitioners and others that are working with people have skills that I don't possess. Exactly the same as people living with dementia and their carers have skills that I don't possess to articulate their position. So I welcome the question. It's probably not a very satisfactory answer in terms of how we do it. For me, charities, third sector, care home providers, home care providers, NHS, we need to be working together on our local footprints. We're all trying to do the same thing. And if we don't get those voices that you talk around, then we won't be able to do that. More partnerships is what we need with people and across those practitioners that we talked about.
Thanks, Tanya, for the question. Well, I suppose most of my work is about supporting professionals and Aboriginal nurses in particular and trying to grow the number of specialist nurses we have. My job in terms of national influencing is to try and raise the parity of esteem for those people who work in dementia care, whether they work in our care homes, whether they work in domiciliary care, whether they work in hospital care, because it is rubbish compared to other areas, frankly. And I've just been sitting on the Department of Health and Social Care expert working panel on the new care workers framework, and I'm still surprised by the myths that surround the absolute skill sets that we have working in dementia care right across the board that are unrecognised and unsupported. We are the only field, I think, that gets this lack of esteem compared to other areas of health and social care. So I'm not backward in coming forward in some of those discussions, as you might imagine. And I think the other thing is, the other part of my job that I'm doing at the moment is trying to work with early career nurses and try and shift what we do in curriculums for nurses coming into our sector, because we've still got the barriers that I still heard when I qualified as a nurse saying, if you want to lose your skills really quickly, go and work in Dementia UK. Dementia. Sorry, I'm obsessed, I can't let it go, right? I love my charity that I work on. But I still hear those attitudes about, if you want to be a really great nurse, go and work in A&E or go and work in addictions. I don't hear that in dementia care, and yet actually is probably one of the most skilled, the most diverse, most brilliant areas to work in terms of skill sets right across the board. Nursing, OTs, social care professionals, they're not care workers, they're social care professionals, by the way, and I'll keep banging that drum on it.
I mean, if I can just contribute something there. In my day job, I've got colleagues from HC1 with me today. We're caring for about 10,000 people with advanced dementia, many with complex needs, nearly all highly dependent. And I truly do not know how our frontline carers and nurses do the job. Now, when I say that, I don't mean I don't know how you do the job. I literally do not know how they do the job. I do not know how they skillfully administer intimate personal care to people who do not know they have those care needs. I do not know how they calm people who are distressed because they want their past to be there present. We cannot bring back into their lives young children, deceased parents and partners, yet they do it. And they do it because of, whether you call it soft intelligence or emotional intelligence, it's about empathy, it's about compassion. It's not about going on a training program. I was once asked to write a book on the care of people with advanced dementia, and I turned it down because I said I don't know how. I can't give you guidance, instruction of how you assist somebody to the toilet who knows they can go to the toilet themselves. I do not know how. I echo every word that Paul has just said. Right.
Can I just...
Sure, Keith.
So I'd just like to respond to my friend Tanya's question there, because at the bottom of it all is people like me who are going to benefit from the answers the panel are giving to that very relevant question. And for me, I relate the way I try and learn alongside health and social care professionals in how I try and learn alongside any human being anyway. And first of all, it's about including the person, inspiring the person, educating the person, supporting the person, caring about the person, encouraging the person, providing some insight, and in my case with an added dimension of wanting to focus additionally upon the next generation of professionals coming in to the workforce, because that's where we can make probably the biggest impact in our position as people with dementia. And I cannot stress that too strongly. All of what I've said would often be related to a professional providing that to someone with dementia. I'm telling you the opposite as well is just as valuable. It's a two-way interchange. It's a two-way traffic. What is good for us is good for the professionals too. And by looking after us, they've got to look after themselves, because that reservoir soon runs dry and you've got to refill the reservoir. You can't care for people if you don't care for yourself.
Hi, I'm Alan Gall. My partner lives with dementia. Unfortunately, she's not with us today. She's at home with a sore back. My question is, I'm from a generation that dementia was not discussed. The word was never mentioned when I was growing up. I mean, my granddad, I now know, had dementia, but at the time, he was just getting old. What are the panel's thoughts on intergenerational work, and at what age should we start doing that work?
Good question, thank you. And as an ex-head teacher and a primary school advisor and a teacher for 33 years, never too young is the answer to that, really. And schools have a part to play in this, but so do higher education and further education as well. And often children see it differently to what adults do as well. And I'll give you a little story which some of you may have heard before, but I make no apology because it's a good story and it's true. Around about 7 or 8 years ago, I did miss the children when I retired. I didn't miss a lot of what came with education, but the kids I did miss. And I used to go to a local primary school to hear children read. And they didn't know I had dementia. It did seem relevant to tell them. All they needed to know was that my name was Mr. Oliver and I was an ex-head teacher. And I used to go in and make a fuss of them and then clear off after the hour. And on one day, this lad came up to me and he said, "I saw you in a magazine." Now at the time, my story had been covered in a health magazine which had gone out through the local community health trust into GP surgeries. And the headline was, "Dementia doesn't define me, says Keith Oliver with dementia." And I then expected this 9-year-old to engage with me in a deep conversation about dementia. I was mistaken. His next response was, after I said, "That's interesting, Lewis. what did you think of it? His answer was, I know your first name.
Clearly, dementia didn't define me.
I'm just going to agree with you. I mentioned earlier on, if those of you that heard me speaking, that I volunteer with a local charity where I live. That charity, do look them up, might as well give them a plug while I'm here. It's not the Alzheimer Society who I work for, it's a local charity in Somerset called Reminiscence Learning. They work with primary schools across the country now, but mainly in Somerset. So the answer to your question is, and you said it beautifully, it's never too early to speak with that. They have a number of different resources and different ways of doing that. It raises education levels. We've had primary school children who have educated their older siblings in terms of dementia, and it always includes people living with dementia as part of that process. It's a long way from, where I was 20 years ago, which was perhaps you might get school choir to come in and sing at some event or something. We need to start right at primary school, and we need to have the right resources to do it so that we're doing it in the right way. But I completely agree with you. I think if we don't do that, then we have a complete lack of understanding for a whole generation of our society, and we might be going around that circle again that you're describing.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I just wanted to touch upon, you asked about the importance of intergenerational working, and I can't stress how important this is as well in certain ethnic minority communities. So my last project, which was commissioned by the Alzheimer Society, actually involved a lot of younger carers who were from a South Asian background, and it was really interesting to hear their stories about how they were relied upon by services to translate and help mum or dad understand what dementia was when there wasn't a word for it, and also in a generation where you didn't speak of such things and it was a natural part of ageing, and how they themselves didn't have the understanding and the education about dementia to then be able to translate it to mum or dad, and just the sheer pressure that put on people to be able to do that. So now when we're looking at projects with those sort of underserved and underrepresented communities, the way forward now and to create impact and change, just as it is universal to everyone, is through those younger generations to help us to raise awareness about dementia amongst each other, because it's those people who are going to see what the symptoms are and talk about it and go to a healthcare professional. So that's really, really important, and thank you for raising that.
Thank you. I'm here in a professional capacity today, but my dad has a diagnosis of corticobasal degeneration, or CBD, some people may know it as. So he was diagnosed at 66, he's now 68, and he's completely bedbound, a nurse in bed. So my question really is, what about rare dementias? Because I think not just this event, but everything dementia, we often think to Alzheimer's, we think about vascular dementia and some of the more common types. And my concern really is that the rare dementias can get a bit lost. So in terms of policy and all the sort of work that you guys are pushing with the government, etc., how to make sure that that doesn't happen. Our family's experience is that there's little to no support. We've had healthcare professionals involved with my dad who have apologised to us that they know nothing about the condition, and that's really wrong, and that includes his consultant who diagnosed him. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm really sorry to hear your story. I'm really sorry even more that there are professionals that don't understand your dad's needs, and I think it's a real challenge, because I think we're still on the Alzheimer's disease track at the moment, and even if you talk to the Lewy Body Society, which is a really common type of dementia, it's not thought about, it's not talked about, it's not even recorded in our diagnostic recordings in the same way. And I think that needs to change. Now, I know that there is a lot of work going on to try and encourage policymakers, Department of Health and Social Care, to record specific diagnoses. So at least there's a recognition that there is more than 3 or 4 types of dementia. The other, there's some great support in terms of Rare Dementias UK. They do some brilliant work. But we, obviously at Dementia UK we have different specialisms, and we're developing specialisms in rare dementia as well. But I think a lot of dementias are sort of still hidden in our society, and we need to amplify that. Certainly when we're around the table at the Department of Health, we are doing that on your behalf, but I recognise the gaps that we still have. There are some information from Rare Dementia Support and indeed on Dementia UK website on rarer dementias that may help, and certainly if families need help in those times, we've got specialist nurses on helplines and in clinics that can really provide support. But I totally agree with you. There's still a gap and still a lack of, and until these things come out into the spotlight, then resources won't happen, and that's something that we're trying to do.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and great sympathy, I think, for everybody concerned there. Really interesting to mention that it's not just healthcare practitioners that need to know about the rare dementias. I had the privilege of undertaking for the chief social worker a guide to social workers encountering people who had CJD, and often that ended up in dementia. It was one of the most least impactful academically, but actually I think the most useful thing I did recently was to provide this guide, which if you Googled, it came up CJD social work instantly, and it told people things that they did not know, and they would not ever know probably, that if you have CJD diagnosis, your social care is free. Wow. But nobody knows about it because you don't see very often people in that condition. So amazingly useful, and the rare dementias has got to be picked up by everybody, so that the moment we put it into Google, or indeed your healthcare practitioner puts it into Google, they can come up and say, I don't know, I've never seen it before, but I know the people to contact. And how sad, and perhaps when you have pause for breath, you can inform that practitioner and the practice and the ICS that this was your experience, because they really need to know that people aren't using that knowledge that's publicly available. So thank you for that.
I mean, I completely agree with the previous comments, and obviously, yeah, great sympathy for you and your family. And I think it does articulate this problem that it is 200 diseases that cause dementia, and the reality is this is a huge area, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the size of this. I know that sounds slightly facile, but actually that's reality. This is a hugely complicated topic of which we understand some, but so much more. Coming from a research perspective, from that angle, the new treatments are a start, and I think what they may do is, obviously there will be benefits for some people, but I genuinely think the prize is about how it supports the field more generally. This point about data is so crucial. Without engaging policymakers, you need the data and the facts, and that's what speaks. And the better we can diagnose, but the reality is that we've only got a small number of subtypes, because actually we can't diagnose all of these diseases well at this problem. So this is where research needs to come in and help support that. And I think there has been more research investment, and that will begin to bear better and more fruit. We've got the building blocks, and we can build on that. I appreciate that doesn't really help in the here and now, and obviously that's where the work of other colleagues is so important, but it's a team effort across every stage.
Hi, my name's Lynn Fair. It's sort of related to the question before last, really, because in terms of the question that was about talking to children, and that whether one's in danger of, just because we're in the dementia world, of thinking that this is a problem about society and children being aware of dementia. Actually, as a country, as a society, we're really not very good at talking about lots of things, and that should we actually be thinking not just about dementia, but actually we need to be enabled as a society to start talking about things, and children are very wise. My husband is has done for the last year, thankfully, with end-stage heart failure. So we started preparing the grandchildren last year, that Grandad was very poorly. And 3 weeks ago, I picked up my 6-year-old grandson from school, and as we were driving home, he said to me, Nana, how come Grandad's still alive? I said, because the wonderful drugs the doctor keeps giving him. But we started that process, but I just think as a society, we don't talk about all sorts of things. It's not what the British do. And I just wondered whether the panel agree or disagree with that actually we can talk about it being dementia, but it's actually everything.
I mean, absolutely, and I think this comes back to my previous point. Dementia is broad and it's complicated, and even, I'm still surprised, I've worked for Alzheimer's Research UK for almost 10 years, how many people don't understand the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease or some of the other diseases. We're talking about some really fundamental understanding, which, to be fair to the public, that's just the reality, and so that's no disrespect to them, that's the reality of how do we better engage on some of this. And I think some of this speaks to the point we've already talked about, stigma and fear and concern about developing this, the fact that some of this is hidden away, that it is talking, you know, for some people who do develop dementia, that is a harder life. There are lots of people who do live well, I appreciate that. So I think your point is a really good one, and I think more broadly, the more we talk about this, the more we find different ways to talk about it from, you know, information, but it is about how you feature it in TV programmes, how you have representation at every level, different communities in different ways, which were how we start to do this. I think there is, again, I'm coming from a perspective of research, but with, you know, more treatments, more research, more innovation, we start to offer more hope and support for what things can look like, and I think that could help to make some of the conversations easier.
Also, I think it depends upon the needs of the child, and I think those sort of conversations need to be organic. And we've heard today about you meet one person with dementia, you meet one person with dementia. Well, you could equally say you meet one child, you meet one child. For some children, those conversations would be very difficult to have. And often they're the sort of conversations which are better coming from the child. If the child raises it, rather than force, you know, a round peg into a square hole. So that would be my thought on that. I've been within my own family with grandchildren and with my children talking to their children, if you see what I mean. And they've worked out when the right time, the right place, right way to do it. And usually it's come from the children. They've asked the questions, they've made the comments.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, because I think that's a really important point. I think what I would hate to see happen is it's done in such a blunt way, saying, right, you know, the dementia expert's coming into school today and he's going to tell you all about dementia, and then leaving the kids feeling vulnerable, upset, worried, with more questions. So if you're going to do it, and I think you should do it, we know from our sort of family-centred work, you have to put the support in behind whatever you say and however you do it, because it's the how you do it that is as important as the what you do, I think. And actually, if you really want to create that more tolerant understanding so that people can have much better relationships across the family and within the family, then you have to put the support in behind whatever information you give, because a blunt conversation about dementia probably doesn't help.
Thank you. I think just sort of listening to what everybody's saying, a lot of it is around education. And my job, I work for Maria Malaband, which is a care provider, and I do a lot of education in the care homes for the staff. But this is more of a personal sort of, I won't say it's a question, it's more of an opinion for you guys and sort of your thoughts. But I recently had a personal experience with my granddad who's got mixed dementia, and he was admitted to the hospital with quite a bad delirium. He had an infection. And my concern was the sort of level of education that the staff in the hospital had. It was almost like ship Lucy and she knows what to do. And I walked in there and there were like things in there like the date clocks. They weren't the right date, they weren't the right time. You know, there was a lot of things like they popped a meal in front of my granddad, and he did need a little bit of support at this time because, like I said, you know, he had the delirium, he was missing his mouth a lot. And it was just sort of expected for us as a family to support him with that. And I was with my cousin at the time who was like saying to me, I'm panicking, Lucy, I don't know what to do, they've just put this in front of me. And it's more around the education in the hospitals that's a big concern for me, from a professional background as well. You know, when I've had to support people with going into hospital, it's always a case of, can you sit with them because we don't know what to do when they're distressed? Can you do this? Because we don't know what to do. And I think it's more of like the education in the hospitals, like what's happening around education. We've talked about it a lot today, and like, is there something that, well, off the back of this, that needs to be done more? There's a lot of education that's taking place, but there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. So it's just more of a thought around, you know, them periods of time when people go into hospital, what's sort of being done there, you know, what education have they got, again, the families, what's happening with the families, you know, they're just expected to sort of crack on and here there's a meal there, you support them with that when the families have never experienced that before. So it's more of a worry around the education in hospitals for me.
Can I first of all respond to that?
Yes.
I'd like to first of all respond to that because my wife was in hospital 14 months ago in a geriatric ward with 7 other ladies, and I guess the average age of those ladies was around about 80 to 85, and it still traumatises her to this day. My wife doesn't have dementia, but it was the most awful experience for her, and part of the reason for that was the quality of training that the staff in the ward had had. And where there was good practice, it really showed up the bad. And I visited her every day and spent 4 or 5 hours with her every day. And after 3 days, we decided this was just too much. And I would take her in a wheelchair down to the cafeteria to give me a break from it, and more importantly, to give her a break from it. And the constant turnover of staff, I don't think we saw the same person more than twice. And the management of the staff was negligible. The support for the staff was seemingly non-existent. And where I made plain that I had dementia and was an Alzheimer's Society ambassador, the response to that was, you know more about dementia than we do. But it wasn't all bad. But as I said, the good practice really did show up the bad, and it was probably 3/4 bad and 1/4 good.
Thank you for that question. It's a really important one, and it's actually what inspired me into this career, because my first job was as a healthcare worker in a care home. I was 16 and my mum was a community nurse, and so naturally said, there's your first job, and off I went. And I had no training, I didn't know what dementia was, I was picking it up as I went along, and then went on to work in a nursing agency whilst I was at college, and then started getting sent out to acute care, and just couldn't believe what I was seeing, which inspired a career in me in around education and training and dementia care. So I know at the University of Wolverhampton, the level of dementia care education that's given across all 3 of the years, you know, throughout training and with practice placements, because that's the future workforce in our eyes, and getting them to understand how you spread good practice and what that looks like, and also listening to the challenges as well, the task orientation, the pressures against time, and recognising that sometimes it's not what you're doing that counts, it's the way that you're doing it, and giving that skill set to people. And I'm in dementia care because I feel like it takes people back to humanity and just reminds them that all they need to do is connect with somebody and give that human touch, which COVID has somehow took that confidence away from people again. And then also things like the higher education dementia network are coming together. Dementia UK sit on that as well, to oversee how we're covering dementia education across all of the nursing curriculums and health related courses. So.
Okay, I just want to sort of wrap that up a little bit more if I can. A couple of things. One is, if you're a family carer for a person with dementia in acute care, you have to kind of battle for everything at the moment, unfortunately, in those areas that were being described earlier, where care is ill-informed and not as good. In areas where it is really well-informed, it is amazing and can be very transformative. And certainly we have our nurses working across the acute sector to try and pick up those areas of difficulties, to try and smooth those over and try and share best practice across a very diverse and very busy care environment. That's the first thing. Second thing to say, because of the gaps that you've been talking about, we put on a free summer school every year for the last 3 years at Dementia UK, which is just trying to do a tiny bit, a little scratch if you like, of trying to meet the gaps in curriculum design that we've got at the moment. This year there was over 1,700 people join that summer school, which I'm really chuffed about, obviously, but actually more importantly, that's telling me something very powerful about the curriculum design, what is going on in our busy acute sector, what we need to do, and where the knowledge gaps are. And some of those are like fundamental, crucial details of what the person needs when they're going. We're not talking about highfalutin, very technical, clinical skills. We're talking about the very basic, crucial details that people are missing all the time. Things like pain, the understanding of pain in acute care, still not good enough. So we've got a lot of work to do, and working with the NMC and the CNO office as I do in my job, which is, you know, trying to make sure that what Karen's been talking about, that curriculum design for people with dementia is there from the outset in all professions, not just nursing. And actually at the moment it isn't. If you look at our pre-registration curriculum, it is terrible when it comes to people with dementia, and yet actually, like I say that I'm a nurse, I don't think I'll get struck off for saying that, but it's not good enough, let's put it like that. And actually, if it shifted a little bit in curriculum, that would make a massive difference, because the vast majority of nurses that go through pre-registration education are going to meet people with dementia wherever they specialise and wherever they work. So we have a task, we have a job on to make sure that that curriculum is changed for the good. It's the same in medicine as well, by the way.
Shifting the subject slightly, just with all the recent energy and investment in disease-modifying treatments that are primarily for Alzheimer's disease, as we know, what does the panel think we should all be doing to make sure that attention is not lost on all the other aspects of care, involvement, inclusion, which we're still, as we just heard, really struggling with?
As I've mentioned, new treatments, I feel like responsibility to at least start with that answer. I mean, absolutely, your point is a fair one. I think there are opportunities, and there are, what we don't want is unintended consequences. The opportunities are hope and the start to change for one of the diseases that causes dementia. And I think there's also proof of concept around some of this, which actually is a really useful starting point. The bigger prize is about how can you make sure there is more investment and support in research for the field more generally, that this is very much the start of a new phase, not, you know, the end of one. I do think this point's about kind of data and how you'll better capture, you know, some abbreviation, you know, how you'll better be able to articulate what's happening within services, how quickly people are being diagnosed, what their diagnosis is, how they're accessing treatment. What we need to make sure is that's not just for a few people who might get access one drug, that it's actually broader everywhere. There is more research to do on the other diseases that cause dementia. Absolutely, they're not in the same place for a whole set of reasons, but the reality is that broader focus needs to cover all of them as well. So I think there are opportunities. I fully accept that we don't want to see the unintended consequences, which mean that others miss out.
That's a question after my own heart, as I'm sure you'd expect. You're absolutely right. We are in a position where we clearly don't want to get in the way of medical advances, but they're not the be-all and end-all for where we need to be. They don't help people in this room now who are suffering from dementia or their carers, and what we have at the moment for people living with dementia is not good enough. And I think that's what you're asking is, does this distract from it? Do people see an end to this and therefore it's less important now for those? So my view on this is we have to focus on, I guess, what I would call people's lived experience now, as well as understanding what that might mean for the future. But I'm quite clear with government on this, and that is we can develop all of the disease-modifying drugs in the world, that we can in the world, but actually we can't even diagnose people at the moment. So they're not actually going to be of any use in itself. As you said, they're limited at the moment in terms of where we are. So are we focusing on the wrong things? No, I don't think we're focusing on the wrong things, but I don't think we've quite got our balance right, as you hopefully heard from me this morning, in terms of how we're dealing with the here and now. So I think if we can balance that up slightly, we will more easily answer your question. But let's not use those drugs as the be-all and end-all, but instead what we should be looking at is, are we able to diagnose people properly, and as we've heard with a lot of questions today. Can we provide them with the right care and support for them to live a good life for as long as possible? And that's where that debate kind of comes in. So I think it's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one that we find, you've said you're more of a research charity, absolutely correct, and therefore we have this discussion all of the time. But we all care, trust me, we all care, and we all care about, both of those things. So I think it's a great question.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So a couple of things from me. I'll be brief. I think I might mention I work for Dementia UK earlier on, just in case. The first thing to say is if your target for diagnosis is 67%, what about the other 33%? That's the first thing to say. And I suppose the question for me that keeps going through my head, and I agree with everything around this, the new treatments and putting money into the research, because actually it is bearing some fruit, and I want that to happen, I want that to continue. But the other question is, so what, right? So what if you're not going to get those disease-modifying treatments? So what if you're not going to get diagnosis? Because this is going to be with you for a long time, many years. And the thing that worries me, and the focus I think that we're trying to focus on at Dementia UK, is that post-diagnostic support, which goes on at diagnosis all the way through to whenever somebody dies, and then after somebody dies. And that's the bit that's missing. It's been missing out of national dementia strategies for years, and if it's missed out of our major condition strategy, and I hope it won't be, then again, families, people with dementia will be left asking, so what?
Next question, Jackie.
I'm just wanting to return to the previous question about education. And my view is, and I was really hopeful when I worked with Skills for Care some years ago now to develop the qualification and credit framework in dementia. I was really hopeful at the time that that was going to be a mandatory course, but it wasn't. We have mandatory courses for health and safety, for moving and handling. Why haven't we got a mandatory course in dementia care? And I'd like to know from each of the panel members what they could do to make that happen, because I can see you nodding.
Oh, thank you for that, Jackie. I think that's really important, and one of the things that people may not realise is that the care certificate is not mandatory. And we know we recently ran a witness seminar, which is an opportunity for people who were there when decisions were made, and probably mostly have retired or moved on, to spill the beans about why something happened, what was the argument, who decided it, what, and it was essentially Treasury. It was Treasury who said we could not make the care certificate mandatory. And just think how little that is, a care certificate. Isn't it a 3-year ology? It's, it is a small amount of training. And that's one of the reasons why I think the care sector is really wanting to get on board with all of this. There was some money, but then it got pulled, and then it's whatever. So I think the big question is, we know why it doesn't happen is that it's money, but it's false, and it's a false economy, really, because if people have training, the evidence is that they're more likely to stay in their jobs, therefore there is less turnover, therefore there's more continuity of care, therefore you save the £800 a hospital bed or something like that. So I think we do know what that is, and it really means, I suppose, for policy arguments, taking our eye off just arguing with officials at the Department of Health and Social Care, who usually are nodding and say, yeah, we'd really like that. But to try and convince the politicians who'll be coming up for election very shortly, that the Treasury has to release some monies in this area. And it is good for everybody. I don't mind if people do a care certificate or a dementia certificate and then go and work in somewhere else, because they carry that with them. But I know really the prize is that they stay in dementia care, they work really well, and they join that small number of, a small proportion of providers who have long-staying staff and then can get the new ones in, because it's really disheartening, isn't it, for people to either be flown halfway around the world to come and work in dementia services in England and find that they're going to be the longest staying people there in a matter of weeks or something. So we've got to get it right, and I think we know now that the answer is not so much the will at some levels, but actually the big economic question is the one to grasp. And Alzheimer's Society, the dementia vote, if there is one, has got to turn out on this. There is nobody who will make the difference other than people who, when somebody knocks on our door and says, I'd like to have your vote, you say, well, this is the condition I've got, duh, duh, duh.
And just a personalised answer for your question is, I should be here tomorrow afternoon listening to Claire Sir talking in the Care Memorial Lecture. That'll help me.
I'm afraid we've reached the end. I've had one of Sue's looks and I'm not going to cross Sue. Please can you show your appreciation to the excellent panel?